By the beginning of the 6th century, the Visigothic elite carved out a large kingdom in the former Roman province of Hispania and parts of southern Gaul, thus becoming a major political player in Western Europe. They carried on the legacy of Rome in Iberia, maintaining cultural traditions, minting Roman coins, and organizing Roman-style feasts and games. Over time, the ethnic and cultural distinction between the Gallo-Roman population of Iberia and their Visigothic rulers had largely diminished, the revised legal codex known as the Visigothic Code doing much to bring all subjects together under one legal system. However, by the turn of the 8th century, the kingdom was in decline. Competing interests between the Visigothic kings and the Germanic tribal aristocracy that administered the state led to frequent civil wars. And when King Wititza, the last ruler of a united Visigothic realm, died in 710, the kingdom descended into turmoil. After a palace coup in Toledo, Roderick emerged as the new king in 711. His accession was not accepted by all, however, and within months a pretender, Achila II, proclaimed himself king. Achila took control of the mountainous regions in the northeast, allying himself with the Basque peoples in the Pyrenees. But to the south, another threat loomed. Iberia has seen massive transformation over the centuries, with culture and language morphing into modern-day Spain. I plan to visit my relatives there later this summer, but I'm somewhat anxious about not speaking Spanish very well. So I'm excited to welcome today's sponsor, Lingoda. Lingoda is not just another language learning app. It is a leading online language school that offers courses in 4 languages: English, including Business English, German, French, and Spanish. Lingoda's live classes are hosted over Zoom by outstanding teachers. With over 1,500 fully certified native-level speakers, Lingoda's team of educators is a key selling point. You can choose to take one-on-one lessons or small group classes with a maximum of 5 students per class. This ensures that each lesson is really interactive and you are learning effectively by focusing on speaking as much as possible in every lesson and getting immediate personalized feedback from your teacher. Setting up an account with Lingoda is quick and easy. Simply log into their user-friendly website, which serves as a one-stop shop for all your language learning needs. In addition to the live classes, you get access to exercises, quizzes, and flashcards to practice with. One of the standout features of Lingoda is their structured curriculum, which aligns with the official Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. This framework categorizes language proficiency levels from A1 beginner to C2 native. Lingoda offers courses for every language level, so you can start from 0 or build on your previous knowledge. If you're not sure which level you currently land in, then click the link in the description to take their quick placement test. What's cool about Lingoda is that you can pick which lessons you want to attend based on your needs and personal interests, and don't need to follow the curriculum in order. Their flexibility is also noteworthy, as they offer classes 24/7, accommodating learners from around the world. To experience the quality of Lingoda's classes, take advantage of their 7-day trial, which grants you access to 3 small group classes or 1 private class completely free. If you decide to continue learning with Lingoda after your trial ends, use the link below to receive a 25% discount on your first 2 months of the subscription. Give Lingoda a try and unlock your language learning potential today. By the start of the 8th century, the armies of the rapidly expanding Umayyad Caliphate were completing the conquest of North Africa. Musa ibn Nusayr was appointed by the Caliph as the Emir of the Maghreb, a region encompassing much of northwest Africa. The new governor continued the subjugation of the Berber tribes in the desert interior, giving Tariq ibn Ziyad command of the operation, while he returned to his headquarters in the city of Kairouan. The provincial forces were predominantly Berber recruits, so placing them under the command of Tariq, himself a Berber, secured the loyalty of the troops to the Umayyad Caliphate. By 710, Tariq began small-scale forays into the Iberian Peninsula. One such attack was led by one of his officers, Tarif ibn Malik. Landing near modern-day Tarifa with a force of 100 horsemen and 400 infantry, his mission was to scout inland and gather information on King Roderick's armies, as well as look for landing areas suitable for a larger sea-borne invasion. His task complete, Malik made way for Africa. Upon meeting with his subordinates, Tariq sent the spoils and captives to Governor Musa, along with valuable intelligence, an indication of a successful reconnaissance mission. Pleased, Musa appointed Tariq commander of the planned expedition to Iberia. In April 711, Tariq embarked from Quetta with no more than 3,000 riders and made way to the pre-selected landing area in the Bay of Gibraltar. Wasting no time, Tariq moved east along the coast, capturing towns and villages before reaching Malaga and turning north towards Cordoba. News of the Muslim landing reached Cordoba. Its governor swiftly mustered a host to oppose the invaders. Somewhere on the Roman road that connected Cordoba and Cartagena, the Muslims met and routed the Visigothic army from the field, then proceeded to plunder the surrounding area. Meanwhile, King Roderick was busy fighting the Basques under Attila, only learning of the Umayyad invasion 2 to 3 weeks after it began. He immediately broke off, leaving a token force to block Attila, and marched for Toledo, sending riders ahead of the army to issue orders for levies to assemble near the city and wait for his arrival. Encumbered with plunder, Tariq withdrew his forces towards the coast of Cadiz, sending reports back to Ifriqiya. Governor Musa promptly dispatched reinforcements of 7,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. By now, Roderick reached Cordoba, where his host was further bolstered by the troops from the local nobles, before hurrying to check the invaders. The king's host swelled to 33,000 troops, many of these contributed by the brothers Cisberto and Oppa and their allies, all loyal supporters of Roderick's rival, the late King Wititza. It seemed that the hostility among Visigothic clans had halted, if only temporarily, to deal with the Berbers. Tariq's reinforcements came in late July, increasing his numbers to 12,000, just as the Visigothic army appeared in the Sidonia region. Tariq positioned himself on a location of his choosing, an undulating plain through which ran the Guadalete River, more of a dry riverbed during the summer. The much smaller Berber army adopted a defensive posture, building earthworks and digging in. Tariq hoped to hold off the enemy and use his swift-riding light cavalry to exploit any tactical opportunities during the fighting. Roderick arrived on the plain, ordered the heavy cavalry to form in the front with retinues on the flanks and infantry in the center of the second line, personally commanded by the king. Once in position, Roderick ordered the attack. The heavy cavalry was tasked with punching through the enemy formation, after which the infantry would pour through the gaps and sow chaos among the Muslim ranks. Oppa likely commanded the left, while Cisberto led the retinues on the right, the plan being to press the Muslim flanks while the heavy cavalry breached the center. But before they could close in, the Visigothic charge suddenly slowed to a crawl, disrupted by a massive barrage of javelins and arrow volleys from Tariq's light skirmishers, arrayed in front. Visigothic infantry mixed in with the heavy cavalry and joined the attack, braving the hail of projectiles before clashing with the Muslim line. Far less numerous, the Berber infantry held their positions on the earthworks, locking their shields as the heavy melee erupted, along the battle line. The men clashed to and fro for much of the early afternoon. It may have not been apparent, but Tariq had successfully blunted the massive Visigothic charge, and once Roderic's men began to tire, Tariq ordered his light cavalry to counterattack around the flanks. Sections of Visigothic retinues on the flanks turned to receive the attack. Berber riders hit their lines, but were unable to break the more heavily armored cavalry, and were soon repulsed. The sight of the Umayyad cavalry retreating back around their flanks raised the morale of Roderic's men to such a degree that they pressed and pushed back Tariq's center. Using their numerical strength, the Visigoths pushed their way among the enemy line as the Berbers began losing ground. Tariq barked orders at the men to hold the line. But little did Roderick know that the slow retreat of the Muslims was a ruse. Their line bending inwards gave the impression that the center was about to break, but Tariq planned this precarious formation beforehand. As more and more Visigoths poured into the center of the bending Muslim line, much of Roderic's armored cavalry was now committed. Tariq began moving all available cavalry to the flanks, waiting for the critical moment to push back Roderic's flanks and envelop his center. At some point during the battle, the sources don't specify when, Oppa and Cisberto deserted, possibly as revenge for Roderic's usurpation of the throne, leaving the Visigothic army's flanks unprotected. Sources are unclear on whether or not the pro-Wittitsen contingents then attacked Roderick, but they likely simply pulled their forces from the field. Whatever the case, by now the Berber light cavalry was already pushing back the Visigothic flanks and attacked the mass of Roderic's men in the center from both sides. Tariq ordered a general assault, telling his exhausted infantry that victory is within their grasp. The Muslim push finally broke the resolve of Roderic's footmen, who began to flee in disarray. Visigothic cavalry tried to maintain formation, but they were gradually overwhelmed and cut down almost to a man. Roderic's fate in the battle is left unknown. Some scholars suggest that he was killed in the thick of the battle, with some writers even believing he was killed by Tariq himself in personal combat. Others write that he drowned while trying to escape across the river. But we may never know what truly happened to the king of the Visigoths on that day. The Muslims lost some 3,000 men, while the Visigoths were shattered, with around 16,000 men dead or wounded, over half of their entire army. Tariq had achieved a decisive victory for the Umayyads, a victory that will echo down the centuries. After the Muslim victory at Guadalete, Tariq split his army into 3 marching groups. One column went to Lusitania, another into Andalusia, while he himself marched a contingent to the Visigothic capital of Toledo. After hearing the news of Tariq's victory, Musa mustered a new army of 18,000 men and moved to cross the Strait of Gibraltar, seeking to assert control over the whole of Iberia. However, the rivalry between Tariq and Musa saw the former stripped of his command and sent back to Africa, signaling the end of his military career. The Umayyad conquest of Spain was to be continued by Musa and his 3 sons in a campaign that would last another decade. The final vestiges of the 300-year-old Visigothic kingdom were extinguished by 721. In its place rose Al-Andalus. If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm. You can also support us on Patreon and get ad-free early access to our videos for as little as $1, or by clicking the thanks button below to leave a one-time tip. As always, we'll see you in the next one.